My guess, Todd, were you a classic paper boy? That's my guess.
I was not, no.
I would, let's see. You would mow the lawns.
It was related to lawns, but no, I did not mow lawns.
Oh, I get the gold star for the day. I'm close.
You're in the neighborhood.
You started as a landscape architect, didn't you, Todd? You just walked right into
it. Well, when you got it, you got it.
Yeah, at 12 years old, he was already designing the nice retaining walls. So,
no, my first job was cold calling for a lawn care service.
Oh, interesting.
In case anybody wants to know, cold calling stinks. No offense to those that do it out there. It was not my job.
How old were you?
12?
Yeah, 15, something like that.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
They do pay you extremely well, though, because nobody wants to do that job.
Yeah.
Or nobody's going to say no to a 12-year-old when you're like, can I come and mow your lawn?
I love it. Awesome. Well,
I
Nate,
guess,
you said you were ready with this answer. What was your first job?
yeah, so technically my first job was working for my dad. So he had his own concrete business. So I've been underneath almost every university in Minnesota, in the tunnels where all the water pipes are. So I used to crawl up and down on my knees, right, just hauling concrete hoses up and down, pouring concrete, troweling, that kind of stuff. So I got the nice lesson of hard labor from an early age of, I think, 8. Is the
Whoa.
I have a picture that I see floating around from time to time where I'm trying to like pull people through there as a young kid and whatnot. I used to be able to stand up in the tunnels. We'll put it that way. My first corporate job was actually working at Panera, washing dishes, making sandwiches and salads after I wash your hands. So you didn't go from the dirty dishes straight to the front. So
Nice.
Nice. I was stocking shelves in Australia's version of Kroger at 14, and there was basically straight after school until the law said we had to go home, which I think was like 11 or 11:30 back then, and then straight to school the next day. So at 14.
So what's the Australian version of Kroger if there's no Kroger here in Minnesota where probably most people are listening?
Well, this place was
Fair.
called Woolworths. So I suppose Target. I think you guys have a Target, right?
Well, to date, yes. There was Woolworths when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
And there are Krogers out west, so we do have them in the States.
Wait, is Woolworths a thing? And I've just never
was.
seen one. Wow, that's
It was,
great.
but yeah, it's been ages since I've seen one.
Yeah. So it was a Woolworths. Look at that.
Wow. Okay, cool. What about you, Tara?
I was going to say along the lines of the food service industry, I started at Pizza Hut, started as a waitress and was able to kind of work my way up through high school. But I mean, as all young girls growing up, I started as a babysitter too. But then I was like, enough of that. I want some of the real money. So I was at Pizza Hut.
Fun
Ooh,
fact,
that's
my
where
mom,
the real money.
Yeah.
fun fact, my mom's first job was also a dough master at Pizza Hut. So
Very
I don't know if
nice.
that was yours as well, but
Dough Master. That sounds
Dough
awesome.
Master.
It's a cool title.
Very cool. Nice. I'm on the pizza train as well, but I worked at Papa Murphy's, which was so nice. It's nice to be in a place where they don't actually like bake the food, so you didn't have that like grease in the air, That was a nice job to have. But, yeah. So on our Tech for Business podcast today, Tara and myself are joined by Todd, our COO and CISO, Matthew, our GRC analyst, and Nate, our director of cybersecurity. And we're talking labor, we're talking jobs, we're talking about the shortage, the cybersecurity labor shortage, which is, I'm so curious how we sort of got to this point. What if we can kind of talk first about where we are today and what led up to this labor shortage?
Hackers. Punks.
Hackers. That's it.
Hackers and federal changes. Really, it's and the pandemic, obviously, as well. Just broad stroking it.
I'm sure we could probably get into some of the statistics along the way, but I'll probably just start with kind of a very general assumption along the way. But typically IT was handled by your network admin or your system admin, and a lot of organizations tended to place their trust into this team does everything, right? They're building the servers, they're trying to keep everything operational. Security tended to fall on the backside, right? It's a component that we should keep in mind along the way, but really IT at the end of the day was always about supporting the business and keeping the lights on in the server room. That's about it. What we've really seen over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, it's probably more than that, but really over the last 10 years has been a major shift into almost a division of labor between IT companies. So if you ever talk to our CEO, Kyle, you'll always hear him talk about how IT is no longer a single person. It's kind of the same with the concept of the kids, right? It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to properly maintain your IT infrastructure. And so now typically what you're seeing is you have people that specialize in networking, people that specialize in system administration or IT support or security, incident response, and you can keep branching out as much as you want. But gone are the days where one IT person can do it all. And now we're really seeing where that cybersecurity comes in, hackers, government, like we're going to talk about. There's not enough people to do it all because the demand is massive.
Yeah, I think kind of as a slight reframing of that, the gap has always been there, but there wasn't a need for more than one person to attempt to get it done because there wasn't as many actors taking advantage of the flaws that existed when only one person is doing this job. Going back to the 90s, we could have had 7 people on a team doing everything that one person was trying to get done. And most of our horror stories, I'm sure for Todd and Nate, with the technical side of things that we've done, are experiences of trying to handle way too much ourselves. And so because of that, I think that gap has always been there, but it wasn't as exposed as it is now, and especially in more recent years, with needing just a full networking team to make sure something's being done correctly. Things have got more intense. Technology has gotten more intense. And while it's, in some cases, it has been attempted to be simplified, simplified doesn't mean more secure. So all around, that gap was always there. And now it's just a little more exposed than it was.
Yeah, I'll do a little bit of the way back machine as well. So back, like Matthew said, late 90s, early 2000s, I held a position where I was the guy that was holding all the keys. And while I did have a team, it wasn't just me. It was different, right? Security was more about making sure that certain people had access to certain things. So, that this is back in the days when everything was on-prem and you had all of your files and folders on the network, and you're making sure that only the executive team has access to the executive files, HR information, payroll, et cetera, et cetera. And then as the world kind of evolved and things started to happen, like, the internet kicked into place, things started to get a little bit more complex. And again, as the world continued to evolve, more openings for being able to having to protect what was going on quickly became outside the walls. You started doing VPN connections so you could work remote, using your cell phones to connect to email, et cetera. And as that exposure continued or those improvements, if you will, whichever way you want to look at it, you started to expand the attack surface of a network, an individual, a company, et cetera. And as that continued to go down the path, it just got worse and worse. So when I joined CIT, it was about 6 years ago, and it wasn't great then, but it wasn't like it is now. And when I started, Kyle and I were chatting, our CEO, we're chatting about it, and I'm going, it's going to get so much worse. And we're just trying to get in front of this. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't think it was going to get as bad as it is. It's absolutely horrific. It's actually getting better. So I don't mean to scare anybody, because it is going better, and I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. But it's just gotten more and more complex. Especially the pandemic, I think, really escalated things over the last 3 years. Is now everybody's remote, everything's pushing to the cloud. Again, that attack surface just keeps expanding and expanding, and as it does that, you need more people to look at more things. Thus, the fact that the need for security is increased. Of course, there's more threat actors, there's a lot of money in it, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that there's so much that's gotten so much more separated and complex, I think, is ultimately the reason why we're seeing such a shortage of people to be able to help and protect and review, et cetera.
Yeah, I guess one thing that really comes to mind and is kind of again a little bit of that Wayback Machine that Todd was talking about, right? Is I really think that some of the key years that really started expediting this is when the government started to truly get involved in care, right? So, Todd was talking about the early 90s, early 2000s. We, with anything like this, it tends to be an exponential curve when people really start grasping onto something like this. But back in 2014, I believe it was, is when the government got involved saying, we need to have some type of framework about how to even manage and communicate cybersecurity to people. That's the birth of items like the NIST cybersecurity framework that we talk about all the time, right? There's a couple of derivatives, or sorry, probably not derivatives if the NIST it was a derivative of those, but kind of pre defined frameworks ahead of that. But NIST cybersecurity framework really picked up, and then we saw one of the executive orders come through with the federal government saying you need to have things like EDR, and the federal government needs to start adopting things like the zero trust methodology, right? After that, that's when we started seeing insurance really mandating all these requirements as well. I'm sure Matthew could also talk about qualified individuals for these different other regulations. But those often come with lots of experience required to be able to be in these types of roles. So,
just as kind of the last thing I want to add on that, which you reminded me of with what you were just saying, Nate, is we saw the biggest FTC fine ever come down in 2019, and it was $5 billion to Facebook. So I think that from a business mindset as well, it suddenly became something that had consequences that maybe weren't as clear before. And so it suddenly became more logical from a business mindset to put money into these roles that maybe had been left to one or a smaller team than it generally would have been. So that market opened up because people would correctly rather pay individuals to get the work done than pay a fine.
Todd, I know you talked a little bit about you seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Did you want to maybe talk about some of the trends that you saw out there, stats that are kind of floating around over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this really supports the light at the end of the tunnel, but you can kind of see how things are going. I mean, we kind of talked about where the shortage came from, and again, if you kind of think about how things progressed over the years, as it used to be that they targeted the bad guys, the malicious, the actors were always targeting things where there was a ton of money to be had, and that evolved over the last couple of years. The last 2 or 3 years, we transitioned to going, everybody's should be concerned, everybody's a target. I don't care where you are. You could be in the middle of the woods in the Tennessee mountains. It doesn't matter. If you're connected to the internet, they care, because it's all worth money to them. So, I mean, it keeps getting worse and worse, but I do think that there are things going on as the government does start to get engaged, as you mentioned, Nate, that as that starts to happen, you start to see that there are frameworks. There is kind of that path forward. And because that exists, then there starts to be openings in the market, if you will, for people to get hired. You're starting to see some evolution of stuff that's going on. So statistically speaking, while things, in my opinion, are getting better, so is the fact that there's so many people being needed in these roles. So I think a year ago we were talking about, statistically, there was something about 500,000 job openings in the US for security. And we actually placed, the whole country, all industries, placed like 460,000 of those positions. However, there's like another million positions that opened within the last 12 months. And so while we're making progress, the demand is just growing exponentially. But again, there's reasons for that. You're starting to see this consolidation of services. When we started this, Nate and I when we started at CIT, there really was not a security operations center and you couldn't really find them. So we built one. And over the last couple of years, you're starting to see other organizations start to build out that offering and offering it to us, offering it to their customers, our customers, et cetera. And I see more and more of that happening, which is why you're seeing this growth and demand continuing to follow with it. Is we know we need to do something about it. People are trying to fill that void and saying we can help. And because of that, there's this big demand for additional IT people. But there are other reasons why it's really hard to find people too. And I'll pause because I know the other guys have some stuff to say too.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
They are expensive.
That's the first and foremost, you know. So just for some basic numbers, right? So if we're talking, you know, Todd talked about building your own internal SOC with Security Operations Center, which are the ones that are sitting there monitoring your network every day. If you truly want to get internal IT to monitor your network 24/7 coverage, right? It takes 8 to 12 people, right, to accommodate vacations, PTOs, that kind of stuff. Take that. Even at a entry level role, you're looking at about $80,000 for that. So, you know, today at that point, you know, now you're going to potentially be sitting here looking at $800,000 million a year just to monitor your internal network, right? And that's I don't know any organizations that's going to necessarily pay for that, especially in the small and medium business. So I can get to that in a little bit, but oftentimes in cybersecurity, these roles are high in demand. And then, you know, because they're in demand, you're also potentially looking at employees. You know, Matthew, you talked a little bit in the past, at least, about how people are potentially going to want to move really, really quick because they are in demand and these roles do pay fairly well, right?
Yeah.
So that's the challenges that a lot of organizations face. Is it's expensive, potentially high churn. How do you maintain that long term?
Yeah.
I did
Tara.
want to just interject here a question. We talk about like cybersecurity and like the entry point. Cybersecurity is so vast of like the jobs that are available. And it's like, where do you even start? Like, I want to get in cybersecurity, but what does that mean? I mean, do I want to go into the training of how important training is or the security solutions around that? So I think you guys will be able to kind of weave this into the conversation, but I think that's a great point too to bring up of like, where do we even start?
I think between the three of us, we all had different ways of entering into the security field as well. So personally, I started in Service Center. I was a tier 1 Service Center tech and then worked my way up to net admin and got the certifications and then pivoted to security because there was a gap in the organization I was in at the time. I found that gap and found out I loved working in it, and then pivoted to compliance because I realized that, for me at least, having those compliance things in place helped me sleep at night. So in terms of the kind of training I had, it was very natural with the job that I was working at the time. I definitely put myself out there. I focused on getting the right certifications that were right for me and the way that they worked within helping me do my job at the time, and it naturally progressed this way.
For me, I started off in IT support. You know, I don't have a technical undergrad or anything like that, but while I was working that role, I saw that a lot of these security roles, at the time, you know, again, they were looking for senior or intermediate level experience. So security was not ever seen as something that was entry level by any means. And so that's where, for me, I saw kind of the writing on the wall of I can't get into that unless I have additional experience or education. So I went and got my master's in cybersecurity, did some certifications along the way, and then that opened up the door. Which actually I had to leave a different company in order to come here to CIT to truly get into a security role. And CIT took a gamble on me, right? I was new at the time. I didn't know cybersecurity in general. So, and that was a risk that CIT took at the time. So,
And I think it's kind of funny that Matthew said we're all different, but we're actually all pretty similar. So I started my career in IT too as a help desk individual, and worked my way up through the admin role into a director role, et cetera. The reason why that I ultimately ended up in charge of security was because in the IT department that I was, as Nate mentioned, you just got it right. Here's the security cameras, here's the badge access, here's the security controls that go on the networks, etc. Where I really managed to really get a deep understanding it is the organization I worked with had an ISO certification, and so as we went through the process of going through that every year. I was in charge of all the IT, all the security, et cetera, and I had to learn all the ins and outs. What are policies and procedures? What are the frameworks? What are the controls? What does the review look like? How does testing go on, et cetera, et cetera. So I learned a lot through that process. And then as the world continued to evolve, I did think it was kind of interesting when Nate brought this up, because a couple of years ago, you would see job openings for cybersecurity, and they'd say we need 30 years of experience. And obviously, Nate at that time is going to go like, I surprisingly don't have 30 years of experience. I just came out of college. And I thought it was always kind of funny because I was like, cybersecurity really has not been at the forefront like it has been the last 6 years. So how can you go and ask somebody for 30 years of experience? It was the dumbest thing ever. But regardless, I did have a very large amount of years behind me as I went through it, but I still went through keeping up to date, going through new certifications, et cetera. So, I've got the CISP, I got the CISM, we've gone through it. Most of us have. But when it comes to how do people get into it, I think the technical background does help a lot. So if you just come in cold from marketing or sales or whatever, it's going to be very, very tough because it is a very technical position and it does have a lot of technical jargon. And so the ramp up is pretty damn big if you don't have that background. And then of course we use acronyms like crazy and we talk like nerds. So if you don't have some of that, it's really difficult to just come in the ground running. So my opinion is if you have a little bit of technical background, it will definitely help you, obviously, since the three of us already do have that. And then starting to work on finding out the certifications, looking at stuff like the Security Plus. Once you start to get that baseline in, I think that's a great way forward. And I'll add one more thing and I'll give up the mic for a minute. But when you talk about there's so many opening positions at CIT, the vast majority of how we fill our security positions is entry level, and they almost never have security background. So we're going, come in, we'll give you a shot, we'll teach you everything we can, and it's going to be a hurdle. I've mentioned this in other podcasts as well, as there is this undeniable imposter syndrome that goes with cybersecurity because, as Tara mentioned, there's so many departments, so many roles, so much everything, so many acronyms, as I mentioned. You can't know it all, and so people are just naturally like, I don't know everything Nate does, therefore I'm not very good. And that's not true. So as you're getting into it, don't be afraid of it either, because you can get there from here.
Yeah.
Ariel, could I say one thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Perfect.
No, you're good.
So kind of the one thing, as we talked about some of this education, there's high barrier of entry at the time and everything like that. I tell my team all the time, I have a master's, it means nothing to me, right? That was the door for opening my career at the time. One of the things that I really do encourage, and we do have a few people on the teams, and that we've seen the education industry shift this way, is formal education, your bachelor's, master's, that kind of stuff, is becoming less and less important. I still do find value in it, right? I really enjoy it. I would love to go do another one if it wasn't so expensive. But there's cybersecurity boot camps all over the place now, right? Those popped up in the last 3 years, and they're phenomenal. It's throwing a ton of actually relevant stuff at you. My master's was very paper heavy, right? And so I encourage people to at least take a look at a boot camp. They're still also pretty expensive these days, but if you're looking for more of an expedited way in entry level, I think they're great.
Yeah. And Ariel, sorry, I'll just one tiny thing from
you're
an
good.
anecdote
You
here.
answered
I
my
promise.
question, so you're
Okay.
great.
Cool. There's probably a better, more relevant example of this, but I'll talk about the one that I remember, which was back when the Swift programming language came out for iOS. Within weeks of it being announced officially, there were jobs saying must have 2 years of experience with this programming language that had existed for about 5 minutes at the time in public. So keep in mind that when you are looking for jobs, when you're finding jobs, even entry-level jobs that say 2 years experience, 1 year experience, they're looking for a drive and a passion as well. They're looking for someone who's staying on top of things, like Todd mentioned, keeping up with the news, keeping up with what's happening in the field, whether that's threat detection and you're just watching YouTube videos from these guys who work for Mandiant and stuff. It just keeping on top of it and being interested in it is part of that. So I highly recommend, if you are getting into it, the boot camp route, like Nate said, is great. I took more of a certifications route. There are ways to do it that aren't just the formal education, like Nate mentioned, which I know can be a little bit intimidating when you're seeing some of these jobs float around with that master's requirement. I mean, take a shot at some of these jobs. If you feel like you meet most of the requirements for them, then I always felt it was worth trying.
So we've talked so much about like the history and then like the entry to this, and I mean, obviously there's 3 right here, but there's plenty of people in cybersecurity working right now, and I can only imagine the stress, the burnout, the compensation, all of those things. I mean, what are we doing to at least maintain the people who are here?
I mean, it's a great question. I was going to kind of address it much earlier too, is as we talk about people get experience and they start to learn, there is an analogy that I'll use for technology. If anybody's in IT, which I'm guessing a fair number are, back in the early 2000s, as people were skilling up, they were getting their Cisco certifications and everything. They were hopping from job to job just because there was so much money being thrown at them. And we're seeing that in cybersecurity too. So as Nate was kind of saying, is the cybersecurity people, they're hard to find, they're hard to train, they're hard to retain. All of those things really, really matter. We were working really, really hard on our employee satisfaction in general as an organization. So we've got a lot of initiatives, whether it's incentive based or whatever, but there's a lot of other things that we try to do. We do want to make sure that the job is fun. As you mentioned, there is a lot of stress, a lot of things that go with it. So trying to be able to decompress and do things outside, or even we actually did an exercise with our team that I thought was an incredible team building exercise, where it's called breaches and
Backdoors and breaches.
Backdoors and breaches, and we did it as an entire team. Very expensive from the company's perspective, but I thought it was fantastic. I mean, the ability to joke and have fun and think as a group was really, really cool, and I thought it was an incredible team building thing too. Does that necessarily do what it takes to get them to be retained? Probably not, but it's one of the things that I think helps.
Yeah, we're joking that as Todd and I are talking about all this, Matthew's learning everything that we do to try and keep him here. But but no, culture. I guess I'll make this really, really brief here, but understanding each person individually is really, really important, right? So here at CIT, I try my best. I'm not perfect at it, but I do try and at least meet with every person one-on-one, at least quarterly. What's going well, what's not going well, what passions do you have, where do you want to go, right? How do we get you there? And truly trying to be a way to foster their growth as well, right? They're benefiting the company, but at the end of the day, at some point, the sidewalks will diverge and we're going to go different paths, right? So let's make sure that when they started and when they ended, at least CIT is a little bit better, as well as I have contributed to their growth as well, right? I try my best. People will leave though, and so And then also kind of talking about understanding people. Most security people, they have a strong internal desire to just protect, right? It's like the law enforcement, right? We're kind of like the law enforcement of IT to a degree. Is we just want to protect at the end of the day. So how do you play into that? And I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff we could go in, but I'll kind of keep it at there. But fostering growth has been um, really one of my main pushes here at CIT.
And I'll say on that as well, and I would agree, Nate, as an employee who falls under who reports to you directly, I think you're fantastic at that. One of the things that I found in this field is thanks
Anytime.
is that the role it's the growth factor within cybersecurity at the moment is so fast. Individuals who come in as a tier 1 SOC technician tend to feel they're past that within a couple of months. And for me, I remember this thing that my one of my college professors said to me, which was that getting a bachelor's degree is not about learning that topic. It's about proving you can stick with something for 3 years out of high school. There was more about the consistency of it than there was about the knowledge you take from it, and if that helps you get into a field you're looking to get into.
I couldn't agree more with that statement, by the way. I mean, it's absolutely true, right? You show up every day, you put in the work.
Exactly. And so I kind of feel that within that, there's this mix of fostering that growth, what is very quick growth and often feels like you've hit this wall, or maybe you're pushing like you've pushed past where you think you are, is just feeling like you're still growing within a space, even if maybe the exact role that you're doing is something you are completing. Having space to grow and change as an employee, and not to suck up too much more, but I feel like CIT is very good at that. So
we should just kick them off this podcast, and then we'll keep talking about the labor shortage. So
fair. But I think that's what keeps people around, right? It's what's keeping people happy is remembering that they're going to grow. You can't stop that. Trying to force someone to stay through whatever means is probably not going to work, especially in a time when moving jobs is pretty common. Finding what that person, like Nate said, finding what that employee wants. What is it they're looking to get out of each role? That's what you're looking for. That's the answer.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat the brilliant things that both Matthew and Nate said to a degree. Is I 100% believe in the succession planning, and Nate and I used to joke heavily when we first started building our team. Was everybody we interviewed, they'd always come in and say, you'd say, what do you want to do with your life in security? And the answer was always, I want to do pen testing. And then, we'd always joke and go, guaranteed that's the answer. And it was 100% for like 3 years. And we're actually starting to see that diverge a little bit, because it's that really cool thing. They've made TV shows out of it, for Pete's sakes. But the reality is once people start to get into cybersecurity, they find out that there's all these other things that they could potentially do. And so Nate kind of alluded to this, as we're doing this process of trying to touch base every day, going, what is the direction you want to go? It's been a couple of months. Does that still resonate or not? And then trying to make sure you're on the path to try and get there. And as Nate mentioned, in some cases, that may mean somebody leaves the organization, and there could be a lot of reasons why that happens. They may want the enterprise experience, or they may feel like they get exposure to an organization that's implemented something in particular. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But my feeling on it, and Nate articulated this incredibly well, is as long as the company is a little bit better off than they were when you came in, and we've helped you achieve that, by all means, that's an absolutely perfect experience. And if you've got that mindset going in, you will 100% express that to your staff, and your staff will feel that. They know that you're in their corner, and that is an incredibly powerful thing when you're trying to maintain your staff. But again, if you don't hold it against them and they leave, then it's okay, right? They didn't do you wrong. You're in a better spot than they were. You helped them get to a better place. It's all very, very great, and it all works together extremely well.
Yeah. I guess I just have a real couple quick things here is, I still talk to the people that left CIT on our team, right? I still have great relationships with a lot of those, because we worked together. We tried building something together. We growed together, right? So that's really important, right? Is trust the people around you, trust your employees, really trying to just build camaraderie along the way, right? And then the other thing that I wanted to chat about real briefly was going back to those, quarterly check-ins that I try and do. What that also means is, there's data out there. If you take a look at some of the marketing, HR reporting and everything is organizations are shifting away from annual reviews and they're making it more frequently, right? Is having more regular check-ins, having more regular compensation adjustments, right? Is, if someone goes and gets their CISP, I know that they can take that immediately out to the next employer and get a raise. Let's just take care of it now, right? It's just do right, pay what people are worth. And then when all else fails, just beg them to stay. I've had to do that
Agreed.
myself. I've had to do it myself, right? Is changes can breed uncertainty and cause for concern. So sometimes for IT leadership, you just have to go, please just trust me enough to make it another week, right? And it'll get better. And I've been there, right? And that's kind of where the transparency and honesty with your teams really starts to come in. And again, going back to trust and camaraderie. So
I had one little housekeeping item I wanted to address, and then I'll try to be quiet the rest of the way through. But I said specifically when Matthew was talking about the bachelor's degree that I was like, I agree with the statement. I want to be clear that, in my opinion, and I'm positive there are other security leaders out there, the bachelor degree, the master's is not required. It does show me something as a hiring manager, but it is not the be all end all. So this is talking to the people that actually are interested in getting in there. Don't be afraid to go after your goals. Go after them because it will pay off for you. What I'm looking for is, do you get it? Do you want it? Do you have the capacity to do it? And if you can show me those things in an interview, I don't even care if you answer the questions wrong. I can teach you, right? If you show me that, I'll teach you what you need to know, and we'll get there. We'll get there together. So sorry, I kind of got a little excited there. I'm saying, if you've got a passion, chase it. Absolutely, 100%.
Like I said, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on my education, and previously on this podcast, I said it's worthless to me. So actually, on some of our job descriptions, I pulled out formal education altogether. So
yeah, and I mean, my bachelor's is not in IT. There are, as helpful as it was for getting to where I am, it wasn't because of the content I learned, which is why I mentioned it as I did. So, agreed.
I want to be respectful of our time, but I'm so curious if we can just real quick, if we had this conversation, same questions in 5 years, what do you think this labor shortage is going to be like? Are we better? Are we worse? Is it the same? Where are we at in 5 years?
I'll take a first stab at it. I think we'll be in a better spot. So I kind of opened up the conversation as I do think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Again, I'm going to use the analogy of when Nate and I were really starting to put this together, we were really seeing our customers were just getting hammered. And it kind of hurt, if I'm being honest. As Nate said, you kind of have that innate desire to protect and help. And so when we were seeing that happening, it's just like, God, how do we get in front of this? And we were doing a bunch of stuff, and it was all really good stuff. And we've been building frameworks and everything and helping our customers get where they need to go. And there's a variety of reasons for it. But the majority of the reason why we're doing it is it's the right thing that you should do, and we're bringing you along with us. But there has been a shift over the last couple of months, years, where you're starting to see better tools like endpoint detection and response. We've got a podcast for that. It's come out. It's been a game changer. I mean, that tool has significantly changed it. 5 years ago, we didn't really have access to it, and it's been a significant improvement in cybersecurity. Seeing companies start to build SOC and offering that Security Operations Center, and offering that to customers, game changer. You can't do that. Nate already talked about it's hard to build it. It's hard to maintain it. It's extremely expensive. Things are getting better. I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. Tools are starting to consolidate, etc. I do think it will be better. But in the meantime, yeah, I think over the next 3 to 4 years, you're still going to see the demand continue to grow as we start to figure out how to actually put this into practice.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd say, I'll agree with everything Todd said there is I think that one of the things that organizations will still struggle with is they'll potentially want to hire an internal person, to be able to do this because as the needs are becoming deeper and deeper and deeper, right? We talked about that it takes a village to raise someone. Same with IT is organizations might start saying, do we bring this internally, right? My point there is it's still going to be expensive. So that's where if you're not at a point, or maybe you're planning to get to that point in 2 or 3 years or so, today you might not be able to afford that. So that's where I'll kind of just a shameless plug here, but that's where an MSP really provides value. Is we can take the expertise of Todd, myself, Matthew, the others on the team, right? We have got so much knowledge on the security team. You can pay for just a slice of time, still bring in all the same expertise, accomplish the task, and then we're gone again, right? And then the next time you need assistance, come in, pay for a very small sliver of our time, and then at least it can help support you to get to your internal plan if that's what you're looking for as well.
Yeah, I agree with Todd and Nate. I will mention that I think I may be pushing more towards the 5 to 10 year mark with my thoughts, but boot camps that we see now seem to be quite overarching. They are get a feel for every single department, as we've seen with where we are now, security being treated as its own, individuals no longer being able to do every aspect. I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to get to more people doing boot camps, 6 weeks, 3 months long courses in just threat detection. We're going to see it in my opinion, specifically people walking out of these boot camps not as cybersecurity, specialists with just a whole bunch of knowledge, but specifically in each of these departments as we split them down and get even more granular in the teams that are doing this work. So I think that there's potential for us to have more specialization, especially in those entry-level roles. And I think it'll be interesting to see what they start to look like, especially with how they break down.
Sorry, one other thing that I just thought of is I believe I did just see, I forgot what state, so don't hold me to this, but there's a state that mandated that every kid should in the school go through some type of cybersecurity course. And so they're starting to also feed that expertise up from the bottom to the next future leaders. So that's really encouraging as well.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, Nate, Matthew, and Todd for joining us today. I thought this was a great conversation, and maybe we'll come back a year from now, 3 years, 5 years, and have this same conversation and see where we're at. If you're curious to learn more about cybersecurity, either as a career or what CIT can do to support you in this shortage, reach out to us at info@cit-net.com or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast. And we'll be back next week with an all-new episode.